On this lovely Friday afternoon. Can't wait for the weekend, a little bit of time off, maybe go out with the family, do a few bits and bobs. So, as I say, my name is Neil, and with me today is Kay. We're both wellbeing coaches here at Isseropia. So we're going to just be talking around some ways that we can kind of manage our anxiety issues if we suffer with high anxiety. I certainly did for quite a period of time before taking my journey onto Isseropia and learning some tips and some tools and some tricks around managing some of my mental health concerns. And as I say, part of that was my anxiety. I did find myself on quite a few occasions just being kind of not able to do anything that kind of brought me any type of value in my life. A lot of coping mechanisms that I chose at the time um, were detrimental to my well-being. But now I've kind of managed to kind of dissect things and learn some tips and some tricks and some tools around managing it a lot better. That's not saying for 1 minute that I don't get anxious. Well, I think we all get anxious, but I've also recognized that anxiety can actually be quite a motivator in certain situations, but it can also be a massive, massive barrier. So this forum is really for you to share some of possibly things that you struggle with, and hopefully between Kay and I will give you some help and some tips to enable you to start maybe managing it better, like I said. Um, and we'll probably share a couple of experiences of our own that we've managed to kind of work our way through. But as I said, with any type of mental health issues or concerns that we have, it is an ongoing process. It's not that I'm going to be non-anxious for the rest of my born days. It's kind of recognizing some indicators um, to then take the appropriate action. So we're going to just put a few questions up for you guys, and any feedback from yourselves would be really helpful for us to create a little bit of a conversation. So just let you know that this is a live stream. So any of the questions that you might want to pose will be seen by the rest of the group on here. So if you don't feel that you're able to do that, then that's really just a heads up. But if you do feel like you want to share anything, or you want us to try and have a look at some of your questions, then we will do our very best to try and help you out on those. So what's Isseropia all about? We're very much person-centered, so we don't look at kind of diagnosis too much. We look at a person and some of the things that happen to us. So we kind of very much individual things, because any kind of mental health concern that we struggle with is different for everybody. So some people can suffer highly with anxiety. Some people can suffer temporarily, or in certain situations they become anxious. But for some people, that can be prolonged for quite a period of time. So as I say, we don't focus on anything like that. We are purely coaches, and we will kind of give you some ideas of how you might want to start thinking about how you can manage certain everyday situations, and then long term putting some processes in place to help you out and bring you back to a better level. So as I say, we're not therapists. Um, we're not medically trained, or I'm certainly not. Some of our staff are medically trained. We do have medically trained staff available at Isseropia. But from my point of view and from Kay's, it's we are kind of people that have had lived experience, have we not? So the first thing that I kind of started to recognize is to understand some of the things that were impacting on my mental well-being, and that was a lot of things for me, and I'm sure it was for yourself, Kay. But one of the key elements was definitely my anxiety at times. It wasn't anxiety didn't kind of overwhelm me consistently, but there were certainly some times when I got highly anxious, to the point of making some some bad decisions, if you want to call that, where I was then kind of finding myself doing things that were actually detrimental to my well-being. And I'm sure that we'll go through that in a second. So there's a quick question there. This was just posed to us. Does anyone particularly get anxious about certain everyday situations? I found myself, when I had certain things happening during my day, if I had a pressing appointment and I was kind of concerned and a little bit worried about it, I felt that anxiety started to kick in a little bit. And I think that was really down to the fear of the unknown. It's something that you just didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I remember quite clearly when I had to go to an appointment for a new job. Actually, it was an interview for a job, and when I was kind of going towards that job, I'd already kind of got myself into high anxiety by, first of all, I was probably overthinking it, looking at the negative impacts that might happen as a result of going to that interview. Yeah. And then I found myself going to that interview, and because I was in such a heightened emotion, that I went in and I wasn't communicating effectively. I was concerned about using the phrases and the terms and all these kinds of things. And lo and behold, I went to this interview and I didn't get the job. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of these things that, first of all, we need to recognize. And secondly, we can start thinking about almost dissecting things.
Yeah.
And having a look at them from more of a positive perspective rather than a negative. Because anxiety is basically the fear of the unknown. Did you feel that when you were having those kinds of anxious moments? And it's really just not knowing about what the outcome's likely to be.
Yeah, when you don't know what's coming, it just used to make me anxious all the time.
So yeah, I mean, the first thing that the reason why we put that up there, does anyone get particularly anxious about certain situations on a day-to-day basis? Yeah. So it's a good question to ask ourselves, and without a little bit of planning and a little bit of insight and kind of becoming self-aware about that, I wasn't in a position to be able to say that. If somebody asked me that question when I was suffering with anxiety, my response would have been everything.
Yeah.
Is there does anybody get particularly anxious about certain everyday situations? My response would have been everything. And now doing a little bit of work around that really wasn't true. It was certain things with an uncertain outcome. And a lot of that is around some of the things that we'll talk about in a minute. About maybe changing the way that we view things, buying a little bit of time to start thinking about dissecting things and asking questions to yourself. Because a lot of my was by things like negative thought patterns that I was having. And they can actually start to kind of cage you a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about some negative thoughts, they can actually start to turn to how do we cope with them? And if you're kind of not aware or you're kind of unwell, then we can actually come towards like negative responses by doing things that also have a detrimental effect on our mental well-being. I don't know how you felt, but one of the key things that happened to me when I was in highly anxious moments was I started to disconnect from people and disconnect from situations. Things like social gatherings, things like sports that I really used to enjoy, because I was worried about the outcome being unknown. I was starting to ask myself lots of negative questions. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they judge me? What if this happens? And I never really focused on the opportunities that might pose itself. Social gatherings, for instance, I never really focused on that I might go somewhere and I might actually enjoy it. And I actually might start to then feel a little bit less anxious But it also started to make me think about when you do things like that and you push yourself away from a comfort zone, how it can build other elements. It starts to build things like self-confidence, starts to build self-esteem. And all of these positive things I kind of discovered on the back of having enough time to start doing some work around why I was feeling anxious. And I learnt a lot myself because for me, anxiety really, if it's something that kind of fleets, comes and goes, is probably more about concern rather than anxiety itself. Anxiety is when it's something that happens on a regular basis and it's prolonged for long periods of time. That's when you really do suffer with anxiety. And some people, anxiety can become really overwhelming to the point where some people can kind of suffer panic attacks. You certainly feel reactions in your body like hot sweats, shaking hands, butterflies in your tummy. And the other thing is when you start to do those kinds of things, it's so easy for us to kind of, excuse the phrase, stop doing it, move yourself away from it. And then I found that there were situations a bit like the job situation where it was going wrong for me because my anxiety was taking over. I wasn't able to actually rationalize things, look at things from a different perspective. So we're going to have a look at another question there. So, there we go. How do you currently cope with your anxiety? So looking back, Kay, on some of the things that I did and you did when you initially weren't aware of the impact of being anxious, what were the kind of things that you did to be able to cope with that kind of stuff? Did you find yourself doing a little bit like I did? Did you find yourself getting away from like social connection?
Yeah, I stopped sort of communicating really. I wouldn't really talk to anyone. If I had to go out to a shop, it would be like a self-service till so that I didn't have to speak to a human being.
Face somebody else.
I would literally just speak to like family.
Yeah. And did you
and
find that when you started to take those responses that your kind of comfort zone starts to shrink a little bit and it becomes you start to stop doing lots of other things as a result of that, don't you?
Definitely. You miss out on a lot. And
yeah. I found myself, there's an interesting point about missing out on a lot. There were a lot of situations that I had where I wouldn't face the fear. I'd rather not do it. And, you know, the job situation that I've been talking about, we've been talking about social connection. I kind of stopped myself from going to places. And over a period of time, I found myself doing that more and more and more. And the negative side of that, I started to feel other emotions. I felt cut off. I felt isolated. I felt lonely in many respects. And I felt that people didn't kind of understand how I was feeling and why I was feeling it.
Yeah, I used to get quite frustrated.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of the time, yeah.
So with the way that I kind of managed it, and I don't know how you guys feel about, you know, anxious moments, is you really do need to start thinking about ways that you can start to manage it a bit better. And I know that both you and I have had experiences around this, and it's a tough thing to crack, would you not say?
Yeah.
Anxiety is a hugely tough thing to kind of break. And as I said right from the beginning, and that's fair to say Kay will probably agree with this, is it's not that I'm never anxious. I get anxious most days of the week. But I'm in a position now, and hopefully you are as well, is you can kind of recognize certain telltale signs, and then you can take the responses accordingly, rather than some of the responses that we might, as an audience, you might do at the moment. And those are the things that kind of trap you.
Yeah.
And then, as I said, your comfort zone starts to shrink and you get kind of more anxious. There is a saying, and this is absolutely true, we start to become anxious about being anxious.
Yep.
And that kind of just stops you in your tracks, and you can't do anything. You're almost paralyzed as a direct result of it. So we're going to talk a little bit about some things that we as wellbeing coaches, and some things that a lot of our members do, and lots of people do, about how we can cope in certain situations. And I think the first thing that we really need to actually start thinking about is when you're actually highly anxious and you're in a moment, there's bodily reactions which I'm sure you probably all feel, where we said butterflies in the tummy and panic attacks. Hopefully it never gets to that situation, but when you kind of move towards that kind of stuff. So how do we cope? Well, the only way to be able to kind of do that stuff is to try and start thinking about what information you need to capture initially. So if you're having a full-on attack, there are certain things that you need to do, and one of those things is to really just to get yourself grounded. Do what you can at that point in time to put yourself back in a position to enable you to have a little bit of time to start then taking responses that you're able to kind of do. We talk quite a bit about kind of breathing techniques, especially when you're in highly anxious. It's almost like you have to get yourself away from that situation, whether that be that you just stop whatever you're doing at that point in time. Breathing exercises, I'm sure most of you have heard breathing exercises 7-11 or 5-7 or whatever. But really, breathing exercises are quite good because it regulates your body relatively quickly, grounds you back down, and it settles down some of the chemical reactions that are happening in your body. So things like that are really good techniques. Did you kind of use anything like that?
Definitely breathing, which is something you can do anywhere.
Yeah.
And nobody's necessarily going to know you're doing it. So that really helped, especially when I was in public.
That's a really good thing. Yeah, that is something that we can do, isn't it? And like you say, sometimes you can do that and people don't even recognize that you're doing it. There's lots and lots of ways that we can do that. I remember breathing techniques. I always was told that as long as you exhale longer than you inhale, then it kind of grounds you relatively quickly. But that's kind of to get yourself out of highly anxious points when you might actually be in a shop, for instance, and you become very overwhelmed and you can feel reactions happening in your body. Your body's really a really good machine, actually. It's telling you that you need to take some action. So in those situations, you need to either stop what you're doing and moving towards something else, rather than some people will actually just flee that situation, go home, and then our negative thought processes start, don't they? And you think, do you know, I'm not going to ever do that again. That was too anxiety provoking. I don't ever want to feel like that again. And that's when we talk about comfort zones and how you can start to trap yourself.
Yeah.
And that becomes something that happens. So what we try to do is to look at, rather than kind of in the moment and then reacting and responding how that moment makes you feel, is in the background doing some work around how to battle anxiety. And we often say we start to do things, or we should start to do things in very small incremental steps. Yeah,
definitely.
So how do you start to manage your anxiety, which is a really good question. So just before I go on to that question, I'm going to pick up. Hiya, Tina. It's nice to see you. What happens when you're in a state of anxiety which lasted for a few weeks? That's a very interesting question, Tina. And again, this is something that I kind of learned, and it was a long process. I had to, in terms of something like that, I had to really start looking at what caused that anxiety for me, and what what did it mean to me, if that makes sense? And we'll talk through that in a minute, Tina. Yeah. But when you're in a state of anxiety and it lasts for quite a few weeks, it's really difficult. It's quite challenging on your emotions. There's no doubt about that. But that's when, that's when we can be our own worst enemy. What I'm trying to say that around that is our inner dialogue, or the way that we actually perceive what's happened, becomes a very negative process. Yeah. So some of the things that we did, or I certainly did, was, it doesn't sound an easy thing, and it wasn't an easy thing, to be honest, is to start capturing some information, because I needed to fully understand what anxiety was initially, and there were situations and how it made me feel, because a situation that I might find myself in that doesn't create anxiety, and in the same scenario might cause Kate anxiety, if that's making sense. So we're all individual. Some triggers that we have are most triggers are probably unique to us.
Yeah.
So you may get highly anxious, and I'm going to put you on the spot. You may get highly anxious when you come into a forum like this, and anxiety starts to kind of affect her. Whereas in my response, because I've actually practiced this and I've done this, and it's become almost like a norm for me, I don't get that heightened anxiety. But then, to be fair, I still get concerned. I still get anxious. But I'm now in a position where I can manage that more effectively. And you have obviously done that because you're able to possibly face your fears a bit more now.
Yeah, definitely.
Kay's only been around with us for a few weeks. She's been through the program and stuff. And, in the last few weeks, she's probably had a lot of not only information, but situations that have created anxiety for her. There's no doubt about that. It would kind of cause me problems as well. But she's kind of in the mindset now of, I need to overcome this. If I don't overcome it, then I'm not going to be able to do my job. Yeah. So she knows, it's almost kind of, she's prepared, and she's almost got to the position now where she's now become comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, because, as you know, feeling uncomfortable for a short period of time does disperse relatively quickly, doesn't it? Yep. And it happened today, and she's going to share some information about how anxiety can affect her massively. But before we came onto this forum, I could tell that she was concerned. Kay was concerned. But we kind of said to ourselves, didn't we? Let's go and take 5.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at this. Let's rationalize it. And then we're both in a position where we say, right, we're going to go and do this. Okay. And we kind of faced a little bit of fear. Kay's fear might have been greater than mine, but I still had a little bit, if that makes sense. So it's really important to kind of understand anxiety, capture some information, and what is it meaning to us? Because it means something completely different to every individual. Is that making sense? Did I make sense on that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So one of the things that we always talk about is a thought diary. Now, a thought diary, sometimes people find it quite difficult to try and capture thoughts, because what happened, I don't know if you used it, but what happened to me was I kind of used it in not the right way. I was having thoughts which were creating additional thoughts, which then was bringing me back to some experiences that I've had previous. And then that became kind of overwhelming, and that created more problems in itself. So a thought diary is a really good way, but if you use it right, it captures such good information. Because a thought diary is, what is the thought at the moment, and how is that affecting me emotionally at this point in time? And that really starts to think, hang on a minute, am I getting anxious about something that I perceive to be real, a real danger, a real threat, where the reality might be that it might be a real threat, but not as big as it might be. Yeah, because some people, there is a real threat and a danger. But sometimes we can actually make it bigger than it is. And that's where this, what does it mean to me, comes in. And once I started to capture that kind of stuff, took me a while, okay? I don't know about you.
Yeah.
To get out of the process of having a thought diary that was creating something negative into a thought diary that was capturing information, which when it's in the here and now, I can now take positive action. When I went backwards, I could very easily go back into my old coping mechanisms. Yeah, because it gave me that emotion and that feeling and those thoughts. And the only way at that point in time to soften that was to use the coping mechanism that I've always used. For me, it was turn to the bottle. For somebody else, it could be totally something different. But then when you start to recognize that they're unhealthy coping mechanisms, when you work in the here and now, you can look at positive ways of overcoming some of those thoughts and those feelings. So that's a really good way.
Yeah.
And that's all about evaluation. I don't know how you used yours, but when I started to capture some of the information, it really opened it up for me because I started to look, do you know, is that rational? I'm making that real? Or is it factually real? And a lot of the times, to be honest, there was no real threat.
No.
There was no real danger. There was no real reason why I couldn't kind of face some fears.
Yeah.
Because the fears become so overwhelming that you don't want to face them. But when you start to realize that some of those fears are not really big fears, there may be elements of it in there, but we are, a lot of us are capable, yeah, of kind of facing some fears and overcoming them. Yeah. So that was a really good way that we did. And then challenging our thoughts. Who of us challenges our thoughts? Did you ever challenge the thoughts, or did you just accept your thoughts to be 100% accurate?
I used to just accept them.
Yeah, and I think many of us do much the same. And when we don't have a real insight into that, or we've not done anything about kind of working through these things, it's very, very simple to just accept whatever it is as 100% accurate.
Yeah.
If I go to that interview, I will not get the job. That's the way that closed negative thought patterns happen, isn't it? The reality is when, you might actually go for that job. To be fair, you might not get it, but it won't be because you think that you're worthless. It will possibly be that you don't get that job because 10 other people have gone for it and their skill sets match that job better. Yeah. So when you start to think about things and allow yourself a little bit of time to take the right kind of responses, it becomes a little bit less scary and a little bit less overwhelming. The other thing that we talk about is how we can start to kind of put ourselves in certain positions that might create a little bit of fear, a little bit of anxiety. And I'm going to pass over to you, Kay, because we were talking just before we started this, and I kind of realized and recognized straight away that how any mental health issues that we might have is almost like a full-time job. It's not something that is able, you can overcome and just switch off and then it just disappears. It happens on a regular basis. We often talk about what it means to us and how we can start looking at it and dissecting it. And you told a wonderful story, and this actually happened today. So I'd like you to share what your experience was today, Kay.
Good story. So I've had a few changes in my life, which has, caused some natural anxiety. So the main one that we're talking about is, so I've moved in with my partner, and I left before him this morning, so he was still at home in bed. But one of my thought processes, if I don't make my bed, that something bad is going to happen to somebody, something, anywhere. So to not make the bed and leave the house was quite stressful. And it ended up that I was actually ready for work nearly an hour before I needed to be. So I went for a little walk before work and just tried to sort of, talk to myself to say that, if something does happen, it's not because I haven't made the bed, it's because it was going to happen, which is what a friend also told me last night when I realised that this anxiety was creeping in. And then when my partner did get up, we had arranged that he would send me a picture of the bed that was made. So the bed is now made. And almost straight away, my anxiety levels dropped quite dramatically, which was nice. And, I'm now on more of an even keel again. So it's something that's going to crop up quite a few times, I would imagine, over the next time while I adjust to it. But we'll get there. We'll get there.
I think that was really quite interesting, and it goes back to the point I was making. Is anxiety can overwhelm us, and we do some work around it. Say that you didn't receive the confirmation picture, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Do you think that anxiety would have grown or prolonged?
It would have grown.
Yeah.
Especially knowing that like he was leaving at 12. Yeah. So if I hadn't had a picture by 12, it'd be like, well, he hasn't made the bed. Yeah. Why has he made the bed? And I would have just probably ruminated on it all afternoon.
Until
I got home.
Yeah. And that would have created, let's say, a bad day for you.
It was, yes.
It would have ruined your day.
That would have been my focus point for the whole day.
And I found that so interesting when we talk about how these things can just capture us. But with Kay's work that she's done, on her own mental health issues, she kind of dealt with it appropriately. And we had this conversation, did we not? And I just posed a question and said, 2 years ago, how do you think that you would have coped with that? And you did respond. You can share it if you want.
I said, if I was working, I possibly wouldn't have gone to work so that I could make the bed. But then I would have been at home with my thoughts.
Yep.
But I probably would have just turned to some unhealthy coping mechanisms and potentially made things a lot worse for myself.
So that shows you the importance of, taking action and working on some of our mental health issues, because they kind of happen on a daily basis. So when we're talking about anxiety, I often say to the people that I kind of engage with and work with, is we need to capture that kind of stuff, because now, and this is just me, I don't believe I get anxious, I get concerned. And it's a bit of a softer word for me now.
Yeah.
But it still has the same kind of response in terms of I can feel bodily functions happening, but I've kind of trained my brain now saying this is a momentary thing and it's affecting me for these kinds of reasons. So it's not that I have anxiety, I have concern. I have concern of something happening that I haven't got any control over. So my concern, I take appropriate action. And I say with my concern, the appropriate action is to go and face some of that fear for a minute, because it's not going to be what you think it's going to be. So again, it was such an interesting conversation we had. It just shows if you can start to take corrective, positive actions, it can have a massive benefit. And that's why I asked the question about 2 years ago, without putting that work in, you would have taken the response that you were comfortable with at that point in time. Yeah. And that would have just closed your opportunities down. Yeah. If you'd have done that and didn't come to work, I expect you've already thought about the consequences. The consequences, this wasn't going to happen, but the consequences could be massive. It could be that she gets reprimanded for taking the day off. She might then, worst case scenario, end up losing her job.
Yeah.
Do you see where I'm coming from? So sometimes it's all that positive stuff that we've done in the background, if you like, or over a long period of time, that enables us to actually cope with some situations that are really challenging from time to time. So, Tina, you've just said extreme worry, and then you've said you freeze. It's an interesting one again. Freeze is part of the 4Fs that we talk about. Hopefully, a lot of you know about the 4Fs. Probably most of you will know about the fight and flight. But freeze is also part of anxiety. So your freeze is all about your body protecting you. So when you freeze in moments, it's again a chemical reaction that just happens. It changes the way that your body reacts. So you kind of freeze because you just don't know what to do. Your body's saying, hang on, there's a perceived threat here. So I need to actually rush the blood or whatever to the internal organs. And that's sometimes when you get faint and sometimes when you can feel those things. So freezing, that's what happens. An extreme worry, again, for somebody like Tina, that's really helpful if you can start to actually look at what is it that I'm getting worried about and use things like the thought diary. Tina, I need to move to get away. I don't quite understand that, Tina. If you want to just allude a little bit more on that, is that you need to move to get away from certain situations, or you need to get away from every anxious moment that you might be feeling at the moment? It's quite natural to feel anxious for certain periods of time, like we've said. But if it's something that's prolonged, thankfully I was managing to be able to dissect it. And when you're in the real deep depths of a mental health concern, it's really hard because everything is just so overwhelming. You don't even know where to start. And with anxiety, it can be totally crippling.
Yeah.
And I think I've said it already. You start to find yourself becoming anxious about being anxious. So when you want to try and get out of your comfort zone, you're anxious about being anxious. What I mean to say like that is you're worried about maybe facing something because people might recognize that you're anxious.
Yep.
So you get anxious about that and it kind of just feeds itself. Did you ever find that?
Yeah, all the time.
I certainly found that when I was starting to reconnect, especially in social environments. I was getting anxious about coming over to the people and them saying, you're anxious. And I was getting worried about that, and it just started to get really unhelpful and at periods of time unmanageable. And then when it becomes unmanageable, that creates its own other issues. And that's where we talk about making sure that our responses are the things that actually are positive rather than negatives. Negative responses probably cage us even further. Positive responses open up opportunities, and they create so many different things like self-worth, self-esteem, social connection. That's a vitally important part of things. And if we're not able to do that, that's obviously going to have an impact on us. Tina says it's turned into depression. Well, again, Tina, if you need some kind of help or some people just to talk to, you can always give us a ring, Tina, because you know that we're here. But this is where I found out a lot about my journey, to be honest, where we can start to actually feel other things from other kind of areas. In terms of, let's just say, I'm going to use that, anxiety to depression. That for me, thinking about it, is if you're highly anxious and you're unable to do things that bring you value, that creates a mood. And that mood, especially within depression, will be the kind of signs of depression that you just want to shut down. You don't want to do anything. And then you start to feel the things like loneliness, abandonment, all those types of things, and that's when it starts to lead to depression. So it might be that you're feeling sad or moving into depression because your anxiety is causing that. Is that making sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's the same the other way around. If you're highly depressed, that can create anxiety in itself.
Yeah.
And this is where mental health is really kind of, it's almost connected to each other. And I found that in my journey massively was I've actually found that what I would thought was causing me all the problems wasn't actually the problem. It was kind of away from that, if that's making sense.
Yeah.
I remember even talking to myself and saying, I'm just depressed. But then when I've opened everything up, it wasn't depression, it was sadness. And it was sadness created by some of the things that caused me anxiety. Once I kind of recognized that, then there was a kind of opening for me. Yeah. I don't know if you felt that. So there's some types of things. Tina, give us a ring in the office, Tina, if you're feeling like that and you're feeling like, it's a natural thing. But if you need some support and some help around that, then just give us a ring and talk things through. It's always kind of good to start by just talking to people, telling us how you're feeling, and we might be able to help you out on that. Yeah. So we're going to leave it there because, the responses, hopefully you've been listening. Hopefully we've helped you out a little bit. We haven't got too many comments coming through, so we can't really kind of pick anybody's up. But if there is anything that you'd like to do and it's not on this forum, you do have, you are able to contact us at any time. We do have a group on what's the YouTube. So we have a lot of tips and tricks and tools on there that we might help you out. And I've just had one more comment come through, so I'm just having a quick read of that, and then we'll probably just kind of close down. So I start volunteering Monday. This is from Jeanette. Hi, Jeanette. I haven't seen you for ages and ages. Good to see you on here. I start volunteering Monday. I am quite nervous about it. Not the job itself, but things going wrong. I have been using distraction to keep my mind busy, such as having friends around, cleaning, etc. I know if it gets too much in the day, I can take a step outside and regain myself. Jeanette, you've really just kind of shown that you've worked extremely hard on getting your life back in control effectively. Volunteering, fantastic. Yeah, naturally, and I like the way that you've used I'm nervous, whereas maybe previous to doing that, somebody might have put that down as I'm feeling quite stressed or I'm feeling quite anxious. But you have kind of changed your way of thinking of things, and you've put quite nervous, which I think is really good. And it is natural. When we're going into anything brand new, you're going to feel something, aren't you? And nervous. But things going wrong. You're worried about things going wrong. There's no different than I get worried about things going wrong. The same as Kay worries about things going wrong. But we capture it. We say, hang on a minute. Yeah, why am I worrying about things that are going wrong? What specific things am I getting worried about? What is actually going to go wrong? Kay might have said to me before this, I'm worried about getting things wrong. I would say, what kind of things are you worried about? What do you think you're going to get wrong? She might say, I might say the wrong word. And I'll say, you're making too much of that. It doesn't matter if you use the wrong word, because the reality might be that you have an audience of 20 people, but not one person have even noticed that. So we kind of dissect it. Yep. Been using distraction techniques to keep your mind busy. Great way, because we can get trapped in our thoughts and our minds, can't we? And another great one that you said, if it gets too much in the day, I can take a step away, regain myself, ground myself, and start to face my fears again. And I bet you at that time, Jeanette, if that happens and you get to that point, a lot of those concerns and worries have deflated themselves anyway. So when you, even if you have to go and revisit or re-enter, they're not going to be nearly as scary. Yeah, that's how I kind of worked my way through things, and it's a process that I have to do every single day, not only in anxiety but in lots of other areas. So it's been great to talk, Jeanette. Good luck on Monday. I'm sure that you will smash it. There's no doubt about that. And Tina, she's put thank you. Yeah, Tina, no problem at all. Give us a ring anytime you wish, and we'll kind of talk through that with you. So on that note, we're going to say goodbye. Don't forget that we've got our YouTube channel, so just pop on there. There's lots of really good information on there. You can give us a call. We are now in a position where if you actually want to get involved in this Europe, you can speak to your GP and he will be able to actually see if you can self-refer to Isopropia. So I'm just going to finish on that last one that comes back, and that's Jeanette says, thank you. I'll try and pop in on Monday. That'd be great. Have a lovely weekend. And the same to all of you guys that are out there. So say goodbye, and we do this every week, so we'll see you again at the same time next week. I think it might be Thursday next week. We normally do it on a Friday, but I think next week is a Thursday. So we'll see you all then, and thank you for your time.
See you later.
Thank you.